My name is Ethan, and for as long as I can remember, I've been looking for something that I couldn't quite define. I never imagined that what I was searching for would come into my life in the form of Father Thomas. He wasn't the kind of priest I had grown up with. No, Father Thomas had a way about him that was different. This presence filled the room in a way that made everything feel meaningful. At 35, he was a man who carried his faith with a strength that was both awe-inspiring and comforting. It wasn't just his sermons that captivated me, it was the quiet confidence he had in everything he did. Every Sunday, I found myself sitting in the pews of St. Andrew's Church, not just listening to the words he spoke, but somehow feeling like they were meant for me. I had been coming to church out of routine, going through the motions, but Father Thomas changed that. His voice wasn't just a sound in the background. It resonated deeply within me, and it pulled me in. I found myself watching him as he moved through the congregation, his dark hair neatly combed, his hazel eyes scanning the room with a warmth that seemed to land on everyone, especially me. At 23, I was working a dead-end job, trying to find my place in a world that felt so much bigger than me. Church had never been part of that journey, yet every Sunday, I felt an inexplicable pull to be there. It wasn't just his teachings that spoke to me, it was the way he held himself, the way his eyes met mine sometimes, as if we were the only ones in the room, even if there were dozens of people around. The first time I truly realized it wasn't just respect I felt for him was after one particular Mass. I was lingering after everyone else had left, telling myself I had questions about the sermon, but deep down, I just wanted to be near him, to hear his voice up close, to see his expression when we spoke. "Ethan?" The sound of my name snapped me from my thoughts, and I turned to find Father Thomas walking toward me, his face softening into a welcoming smile. "I didn't expect to see you here," he said, his voice kind and gentle. "Is everything all right?" I felt a lump in my throat, unsure of what to say. "Yeah, just wanted to thank you for the sermon today," I replied, forcing a smile. It really spoke to me. His smile widened, and I saw something flicker in his eyes. "I'm glad to hear that," he said. "That's what I'm here for." There was a brief silence between us, and I could feel the air shift in a way I couldn't explain. His gaze lingered on me for a moment longer than usual, and for the first time, I wasn't sure if he was just being kind or if there was something else there. Before I could say anything more, a voice called to him from across the room, and he excused himself with a gentle, "I'll see you soon, Ethan." As he walked away, I felt a mixture of disappointment and confusion. Had I imagined the in his gaze, or had there been something there that I hadn't yet figured out? The next Sunday, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. I found myself staying after Mass again, telling myself it was for the purpose of asking about something I hadn't quite understood in the sermon. But the truth was, I was hoping to speak with him again, hoping that whatever had been there between us wouldn't fade. When the congregation had mostly cleared, Father Thomas approached me once more, his smile as warm as ever. "Ethan, I was wondering if you'd be interested in joining our young adults group. We're having dinner next week at the parish hall, and I think you'd really enjoy it." My heart skipped a beat. "I'd love to," I said, trying to keep my excitement in check. "I'll see you there then," he said before walking away, his expression still soft, like he was holding onto something unspoken. The week felt endless. I couldn't stop thinking about the dinner, about him, about the way he made me feel things I couldn't explain. When the night of the dinner arrived, I was a bundle of nerves, but as soon as I stepped into the parish hall, I felt a small sense of calm. The familiar faces of the other members of the group greeted me, but my eyes were fixed on Father Thomas. He seemed to glide through the room with ease, speaking with everyone, his smile genuine and warm. But when he spotted me, his face softened in a way that made my heart race. "Ethan," he said as he approached, his voice full of welcome. "I'm glad you could make it." "Thank you for inviting me," I replied, trying to steady my breath. We spent most of the evening talking, and I couldn't help but feel that he saw me in a way that no one else did. I wasn't just another face in the crowd. For the first time in a long while, I felt like I mattered. As the night came to a close, Father Thomas walked me to the door. "I hope to see you again soon," he said, his tone sincere. "I will," I promised, my heart pounding in my chest as our eyes met for what felt like an eternity. When I got home that night, I couldn't stop thinking about him. Father Thomas wasn't just a priest, he was something more, and it terrified me. But it was also thrilling, and I knew that I couldn't just ignore the way I felt. The next few weeks passed in a blur, but I found myself staying after Mass more often, lingering in the quiet sanctuary while others left. I told myself it was just because I liked the peace, but the truth was, I was hoping for more moments with Father Thomas, hoping that we would share a conversation, a look, anything that would hint that what I felt wasn't one-sided. One Sunday, after helping with a community event, Father Thomas approached me with a new offer. "Ethan, I could use your help with some of the church's outreach work. There's a food drive coming up, and I think you'd be a great fit." I hesitated for a moment, surprised at the suggestion. "Of course," I said before I could stop myself. "I'd love to help." The next few weeks were filled with organizing events, sorting donations, and spending more time with Father Thomas. Every task seemed a little less ordinary when he was by my side. It wasn't just the work that kept me coming back, it was the way we worked together, how our conversations flowed as naturally as breathing. Each moment spent with him felt like a small, precious treasure. One evening, after a long day of delivering care packages, we found ourselves sitting on the steps outside the church, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The world around us seemed to pause, and for a moment, it was just the two of us. "You seem happier lately," Father Thomas remarked, his voice breaking the silence. "I am," I admitted. "Being here, helping out, it just feels right." His gaze turned distant, almost reflective. "It's amazing how much good can come from simple acts of kindness," he said. "It reminds us of what really matters." There was a pause, and I could feel the weight of his words. I wanted to say something, to thank him for everything he had given me, but the words didn't come out. Instead, I just sat there, caught between the longing in my chest and the fear of what might happen if I spoke the truth. "You can always talk to me, Ethan," he said gently, as if reading my thoughts. "About anything." I looked at him then, really looked at him, and in that moment, I realized something. This connection between us wasn't just a passing thing, it was real. The days following that quiet evening with Father Thomas felt like they existed in a world apart from everything else. I was still helping with the outreach programs, but every task, every conversation, seemed to carry a weight I hadn't felt before. It wasn't the work itself, it was the quiet moments we shared. The brief, fleeting conversations, the way his eyes would meet mine when I said something he found thoughtful, the way his smile lingered just a bit longer than necessary. It was as if everything was leading somewhere, but I couldn't figure out where. That week, we were preparing for a larger event, a fundraiser to support the church's programs. Father Thomas asked me to take the lead on organizing volunteers. I couldn't believe he trusted me with such an important task, and the pride I felt was overwhelming. But it was more than that. There was something about the way he looked at me when he asked, something that made my heart race and my mind cloud with possibilities. The day before the fundraiser, I was at the church early, going over final details. The place was quiet, the soft hum of the city outside barely noticeable. I was arranging tables in the hall when Father Thomas came in. He seemed unusually calm for someone preparing for such an event, but there was something else in his demeanor. I could sense a quiet tension in the air. "Everything looks great," he said, his voice low and warm, like he was trying to ease the nervous energy that was building in the room. "Thank you," I replied, feeling a little out of place. "I'm just doing what I can to help." He moved closer, and I could feel the subtle shift in the space between us. "You're doing more than just helping," he said softly. "You've been invaluable, Ethan. I'm really grateful." My heart beat faster. He wasn't just saying those words because he had to. I could tell by the way he looked at me that he meant them. "Thank you," I said again, my voice barely above a whisper. There was a long pause, and in that silence, everything around us seemed to fade away. The church, the event, the world outside it all disappeared, leaving only the two of us standing there. I didn't know what to say next, and neither did he. It was like we were both waiting for something, a moment, a sign, an opening, but neither of us could quite find it. Finally, Father Thomas spoke, his voice tinged with something I couldn't quite place. I've been thinking a lot about you, Ethan, he said, his gaze steady but soft. About everything we've shared, the work, the time spent together. It's been more meaningful than I expected. I looked at him, my breath caught in my throat. Me too, I said, unable to hide the truth in my voice. I never thought I'd feel this way. About you, about all of this. He took a slow breath, his gaze flickering as if he were weighing his words. It's complicated, he said quietly, his hands folding together. The connection we have, I can't explain it, but I feel it too. My pulse quickened at his words. I had been wondering if I was just imagining things, but hearing him say it, knowing that he felt something similar, made everything feel so much more real. It wasn't just my heart racing anymore, it was something deeper, something that felt like it might change everything. I don't know what this means, Ethan, Father Thomas continued, his eyes never leaving mine. I've spent so much of my life devoted to my faith, to this calling, that I've never allowed myself to think about things like this. But with you, it's different. His words hung in the air like a confession, heavy and fragile. I didn't know how to respond. I wanted to reach out, to tell him that I understood, that it didn't have to be complicated. But I knew it wasn't that simple. There was too much at stake, too many questions that neither of us had the answers to. I don't know what to do either, I admitted, my voice shaky. But I can't stop thinking about you, Father, about us. He closed his eyes for a moment, a quiet sigh escaping his lips. Ethan, this isn't something I ever expected to feel, but I can't ignore it. I can't just pretend it doesn't exist. I took a step closer, my heart pounding in my chest. Neither can I whispered. But what does this mean for us? Father Thomas opened his eyes, looking at me with an intensity that sent a shiver down my spine. I don't know, he said, his voice almost broken. But I do know that whatever this is, it's not something I can just push away. We stood there for a moment, caught between what we felt and what we knew we couldn't act on. The unspoken truth between us hung in the air, and neither of us knew what would come of it. The fundraiser that evening went on without a hitch. The room was filled with laughter, conversation, and music. But my mind was elsewhere. Every time I caught a glimpse of Father Thomas across the room, my heart would skip a beat, and I'd have to remind myself that we couldn't just act on the connection we shared. It wasn't just about it was about everything else that would be affected by it. As the night came to a close, the last guest filed out of the parish hall, and I found myself alone with Father Thomas again, just as we had been before. This time, the silence between us felt heavier, like there was something we needed to say but couldn't. You did great tonight, he said, his voice soft and sincere as he walked toward me. The event was a success because of you. Thanks, I replied, though I could barely focus on his words. My mind was too preoccupied with the conversation we had left unfinished. Ethan, he said, taking a deep breath, I don't want to leave things like this. We need to talk about what we feel, what this means for both of us. I nodded, my throat tight. I know, I said, my voice barely audible. I don't know what comes next. I don't know how we can move forward with all of this. Father Thomas stepped closer, his presence warm and comforting, yet full of uncertainty. We'll figure it out, one step at a time, I promise. For the first time in a long while, I felt a sense of peace. It wasn't the kind of peace that came from having all the answers. It was the kind that came from knowing that we didn't have to figure everything out right now. Since I didn't know how to name, he smiled, a gentle, understanding smile that made my heart ache. We'll be okay, Ethan. We'll figure this out. And for that moment, I believed him.